And good morning, everybody. We are live. Congratulations. You made it through this holiday week. Another week of food safety, good quality, putting that product out there to help people celebrate their holidays. And we're very grateful for it and all that you do, because a lot of times in food safety and quality assurance, we don't get those accolades because it just happens and people just kind of assume it does. So with that, between Jill, Tia, and myself, we want to say thank you for all that you do. We really appreciate that. So if you're new to this, welcome. This is the Food Safety Chat, and my name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. Pull up a chair, and we're going to have an hour here to talk about all things food safety. And one of the things you're going to notice with this is that this is not a presentation. This is a discussion, which is always just a ton of fun. So I love having experts on, and I ask them some questions, and then we discuss it. And the best part of it all is your contributions, and we have some really, really fun contributions. And one of the things that we love to do on the chat, number one, is, hi, Jill and Tia. How are you two this fine Friday?
Good morning. Thank you for having us on today.
Yeah, it's definitely a nip in the air here in Colorado. How's the weather where you're at?
It is beautiful outside, but it is cold. I think it's in the 30s here in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm in Baltimore. I'm talking to you two.
Right. And I'm in Minnesota. So, right, we've got gray skies today. We're gearing up for some snow probably this weekend and cold weather moving in next week. But we've been blessed with, well, I don't know, blessed. I mean, I like cold weather. We don't have ice on our lakes. We don't have snow to go snowshoeing. So I kind of miss that stuff. So It's been a mild winter so far.
Yeah, we lived in Buffalo for 5 years, and when Lake Erie finally froze over, it was like they would announce it on the news, and they're like, "Yay, the lakes froze!" Because then, number one, the snow would stop. Right, these massive lake effect snowstorms you get, and it was the start of ice fishing. And so then on the lake outside of the city, everybody had their spots, and they would put up their tents, and some very impressive, I mean, second homes pretty much out on the ice. With
That's
those
like
guys.
on my list is to go ice fishing. I didn't even know it was a thing. Growing up in Tennessee, right? Like, we're not ice fishing. So when I grew up, started meeting people that grew up in Minnesota and did some ice fishing, I'm like, ooh, okay, I want to do that.
Oh yeah, yeah. My wife's sister lives in Wisconsin, and they've got like a little cabin, like a little pontoon boat type thing up on a lake up in the north side of the state. And yeah, that's where they spend their weekends, going up there and fishing and hanging out, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So good morning, Austin. Good to see you. And so one of the things we love to do on the chat, and we've already loaded to it, is we kind of go over where we're at in the world and what's going on, because part of this is always amazing, is in this chat, we get people from all over the world who join us, India and Nigeria and everywhere, which is always really amazing. And so I'm in Colorado, as Jill says she's in Minnesota, and Tia's in good old Maryland. So punch in there where you're at in the world, like Austin has done as well. We've kind of put together a nice group of people who come here every week, of which we're super grateful for, because, an hour of time out of your busy work schedule is a lot. So to come here and grow and learn new things and different perspectives, that's what it's all about, because food safety is not a point of competition, and we're here to help each other. And so hopefully we can help you maybe just a little bit here today to kind of think about some new things here for next week. So one of the things that we do here on the chat as well is, everybody, please join us. I had a little click.
My water bottle.
For a drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers, everybody.
Cheers to the new year.
2024. Amazing.
2024.
Here we come.
What's that?
I said, here we come, 2024.
Yeah, I don't know if we're ready for it, but it's going to be coming either way. So one of the things, and this is kind of part of my normal cadence of thing, and I would imagine it is with other people as well, is December tends to be a month of reflection, and you're looking at what you want to accomplish in the next year. And we've done some really amazing shows here recently around setting goals and how to look at these type of things. And of course, goals are important. And doing what we do, we're very technical people, and we think in numbers and charts and all these type of things. And those goals are generally pretty easy to set, right? We go through those and say, okay, here's my complaint per million rate for next year. Here's my new target. Here's my stretch goal around auditing scores and these type of things. And you trot those over to your boss, and he looks them over and goes, okay, cool. And a lot of times we're tempted to leave it just at that. And that's a huge problem, right? Because part of this is, number one, right? We used to hear in the past, oh, there's your business life and your personal life. And I think pretty much everybody agrees now that those two things are kind of together now. I mean, especially with COVID and working from home. I mean, look at us, right? And those things have kind of merged a lot. And if you're going to be successful in business, you have to be successful in your support of the business, right? You have to be healthy. You have to have a sharp mind. You have to take care of yourself, and putting in goals that go beyond just those business metrics is super important. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right, Brian. I think that we've kind of learned, even through our studies and early on in our career, how to build those KPIs around we like to say our technical things, right? Like consumer complaints, auditing, whatever, sanitation, completion, all of those things. And it's like that thing that we just naturally do because we've been taught to do it. But we miss some very important things that we need as we grow as business people, right? As businesses, but even as leaders in organization. And that's all focused around your development and your team's development.
Yeah.
How are you going to lead differently this year, right? What goals do you have around yourself and your team on how you're growing those people skills? Because those things are needed to drive all the technical KPIs.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And it's an important, I mean, just for life overall, right? Is we all have to grow and we all have to learn and continue, because it's kind of like that old saying, right? If you're not growing, you're decaying. And that's definitely the case. And we all know people who, for whatever reason, chose to not continue growing. And if let's say that you haven't seen that person in a couple of years, and then you see him and you're like, whoa, right? You hopefully you don't do that, but you're like, my goodness, what happened to them type thing, right? And the other side of that bell curve is these stories of the 90-year-old great grandma who goes back to college and gets her degree, right? And kind of going across the stage with her walk or whatever else, right? That's winning in life, right? That's growing and constantly improving until you're in the ground, right? And that's one of the keys to happiness, and figuring that out and doing those things is super important.
It is, and I think that's the whole part of this, is that we are whole beings. And even before, when we used to try to compartmentalize and have personal and professional, I think we've seen through the years, whether it's through engagement studies, turnover, like all these different areas where we know we have signs. There's even data like the Mercer report that tells us employee needs have changed. Like they don't want to have to compartmentalize, because as humans, we're too complex. We're complex already.
Yeah.
So trying to sort out like this is appropriate for work and that's okay for work, but this is only personal, or this is only that's a lot of effort that we're wasting versus just invite people into the space, invite them to be who they are, help them bring out their gifts and talents, because then it's flowing into all of our organizations.
And I think a lot of the times too is grabbing those moments where maybe you can do both. So I was kind of chuckling to myself, because I remember at certain points in the past, Jill, we've been having conversations, not necessarily like here in the chat, but just different things that we've been talking about. And you've been at the hockey rink. Right? and so you're there watching the kids and having perform, and good job, and you're also getting other things to do at the same time.
I think one thing that we tricked ourselves back in the day of we can separate, but to Jill's point, just as human beings, right, a piece of us is coming with us to work, right, leaves with us. It's better for the person as well as the organization if we're able to embrace who we are at all times. And I think for the organizations that has shifted to, I want you to be your whole self at work and at home, and I'm going to support those efforts in the way that we do work, right? So that means if you have kids that's doing hockey, right, that's also important as finishing the report next week. And so when organizations that embrace that work, we see that their people are more engaged and people are willing to go more, right? They have more energy to do the stuff at home, but also the stuff at work. It leads to more profitability for the organizations. Like, this is data that we have on organizations that have embraced this whole being, well-being mindset for their organization.
Yep. And so part of that, and what we wanted to try and do with our structure here for the conversation today is kind of go through, okay, well, great. We hear what you guys are saying. Where do we start? And then hopefully give you some practical ideas for things here toward the end. Because part of this is our blind spots, and we all have these. And as human beings, it's part of our evolution that we size people up very quickly. And that may be right, it may be wrong. But that's just the way how things evolved, right? Because it's fight or flight. And if you're living back in caveman days and a new tribe of people come wandering through your territory, you need to figure out pretty quickly, okay, is this group friendly, or are they going to come and take our stuff? And that's kind of built in. And so we make these judgments around these. And understanding those things is super important. And a lot of times, the only way you can get the feedback on those blind spots is from those other people.
Yeah. And, there's such a focus on culture, right? Creating communities for belonging at work so that people want to stay there, so that people feel valued. And I think, especially as we talk about, food safety professionals and us as leaders and technical professionals, critical thinking and analytical skills are really important. But those are not people skills.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't remember which year it was, but recently Harvard Business Review, I wrote it down because I thought it was important enough. But 70% of employees have not mastered the skills they need for the work today. So when we think about the gaps that we have and the development that we're doing, we keep looking, or we gravitate towards these technical developments, even if it's, I'm going to the IAFP conference or I'm going to Food Safety Summit. Often those are with the mindset of I can network, but I'm also going to go learn, what's new in maybe auditing, or what's new in these regulations or for labeling. So it's really thinking about where are some of these gaps that we haven't mastered today, but also thinking ahead, because at the last show we were on, we were talking a little bit about World Economic Forum, and they said 44% of workers' core skills are expected to change in the next 5 years.
Right.
So we have to be thinking today about what do we need, not just for this year, but what are we going to need to start building on for within 3 years, within 5 years.
Yeah.
It looks different than what we're doing today.
Yes. Yeah. And Jill, I think that also goes to the point of we have to continuously be looking at ourselves and how we're going to develop. We have these conversations around leaders, developing leaders all the time, right? Because that's what we do at Catalyst. And when we run into someone that's like, I'm a great leader, I have everything that I need. It's one of those things that we know they're going to probably be in trouble in a couple of years because of the statistics that Jill read, but even from our own experiences, right? We've met those great leaders that were so great, but if they don't continue to develop themselves, just give it a little bit of time. And now the way that they lead is old school, right? Not in line with the times, right? There's a new generation coming in. They haven't really been open-minded enough to understand, okay, how do I need to shift my leadership as my team shifts, as the people around me shift?
Good point. Good point. Yeah, we see these articles on LinkedIn all the time, right? How to relate to the new generations, right? If you're an old fogey like me, just get in there and work, and they're like, "Where's my phone?" They're like, "You don't even know what they look like. This is what you see." And how do you relate? So figuring those things out. So it's kind of an interesting thing as you go through life, isn't it? So when we were younger, right, we would kind of roll our eyes about the silly things that our grandparents would do, and guess what?
Here we are.
Exactly. Right. It's this cycle. But you remember too, the people that were your parents' age or grandparents' age, and then it just seemed like they got it. Right? It seemed like, oh wow, your mindset is just so different than other people that I know that are your age. We remember those people and we gravitate to those people. But they're only like that because they have continued to learn and continue to evolve and continue to be intentional about that, because it just doesn't come to us, right?
Yeah.
Like we just don't sit still and it comes to us, and then all of a sudden we just download this information because the world is like, ooh, needs a system upgrade. That's not happening. You have to be intentional about that growth. And those are people, right, that people lean on and gravitate to. And those are the type of leaders we need in the organization as we focus on something big like culture.
Yeah. And a lot of times in organizations, I'm sure, we've all been through this, is okay, part of the new rollout of the HR processes here at XYZ company, we want everybody to do 360 feedbacks, right? And you're like, oh, okay, fine. So you go and you make deals with your coworkers who are going to give you good reviews, because you're just looking at it from a business standpoint. It's like, okay, you give me a 360 feedback, I'll give one to you, and it's kind of like mutually assured destruction, right? If you don't nuke me, I won't nuke you, right? So,
right. That's not the way
it's
supposed to work.
And does it do anybody any good? Not really, right? They're not going to be honest in those evaluations. They're going to, it's kind of like when you ask for recommendations and you prepare a letter so that the person, all they have to do is sign it, right?
Sign it.
What good does that really do?
I think too, on like, how are you using those results? Like sometimes and even myself, when I've taken a 360 or people have taken 360s, it kind of just stops after that. Like, you read it, they say, yep, you're ready for promotion. And then they promote you, and then that's it. But really, like, if you've done it properly, right, and you've gotten some really good feedback, there's something there that you could ask more questions about. And that's interesting. Like, even though Brian was supposed to write me a great review, and it was a great review, there's some things in there that he said that maybe I didn't expect for him to say. Let me ask more questions about it. Let me explore, maybe ask other people around, hey, I got this feedback. What do you think about this? Do you see this coming from me? Does that sit right with you when we talk about my leadership style? And so I feel like people stop short, or even organizations don't have a process to continue with that feedback on, okay, what of this feedback do you want to take in and focus on over this next year to make yourself a leader? It's like when those things happen, that's when you start to see, this organization has a really great feedback loop where they're doing something about the feedback, revisiting it, and it's all intentional.
Right. That's a good point. Well, and I think within that statement, it was good insight here as well, is that when you find those honest people who give you actionable feedback that you can go, oh, wow, that's rare. And so when you find that, that's super, super valuable. And a lot of times you have to go outside. And so we all have those, friends that we've had for a long time and they've known us forever, and they see us, right? And they'll give you that feedback, right? And they'll like hit you right between the eyes. And it generally starts with something like this, right? Dude, right? And they'll hit you with it. And you're like, yeah, it's like, Brian, dude, you're getting fat. Yeah, you're right. Okay, let's start exercising. Okay, yeah, you're right, right? And generally that's the way the conversation goes, because it's true, right? You're like, I ate too much cake over the holidays. Yep, time to get back on track. Yep, let's go to the gym Monday morning. Right? And when you have those friends like that, oh my God, yeah, accountability and honest feedback, super important.
Yeah.
Well, it goes back to one of the things you talked about at the beginning, Brian, about our blind spots.
Yeah.
The best leaders have intentionally bring awareness to what they're doing. Yeah. And so having people who are willing to give you feedback, even if it's the sarcastic feedback, what are the nuggets you can pull? But one of the things, actually, I was just reviewing one of our boot campers that finished up this fall. They sent their workbook in for completion. And one of the things that I loved is through coaching, obviously we're fans of coaching, but we really ask people to say, like, to go into situations and then notice and observe. Mm-hmm. Because yes, you can get information from other people, but when you can start creating this process of understanding just the impact that you have and noticing how people respond to you, that's another way to fill in some of those blind spots. Because this person even wrote, like, all of a sudden I noticed that they weren't really conversational, or they were holding back. But when I led in this way, then I noticed this happening instead.
Wow.
Powerful.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
a good
It
point.
really is. It really is. It's like, and you would have never known to do that, right? If you hadn't stretched yourself and put yourself in a different situation and intentionally said, hey, I want to develop.
Yes.
Like, this person had no idea what they were going to get out of boot camp. What is going to stick? What's going to work for their group? But they committed and they worked through, each of the pieces. And and noticing those things to say, okay, yeah, I can just make this shift as a leader and have so much more impact. And that's, to Jill's point, knowing yourself, right? Knowing yourself, knowing what you're doing, taking a step back, listening more than speaking, right? To really be able to notice around you.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, everybody has, we talk about it on here, introverted people, extroverted people, and things like we have these tendencies, right? And they're tendencies, right? There's nobody who's 100% introvert, right? You have different variables associated with this. And part of that is understanding that in other people as well. So, for example, for me, I like going to sporting events. I don't have a whole lot of tolerance for that. It's just, for me, it's like, and Jill's like, what? Right. So for me, it's just like, if somebody says, hey, you want to go to a Broncos game or something like that? I'm like, no, I don't, which they probably think I'm just a weirdo. Right. But for me, it's just like, okay, I weigh it out and say, okay, the things I got to get done versus the hassle of doing this. It's just not that interesting to me. So my sister has a boyfriend, super nice guy, and mega extrovert, and he is constantly just doing something all the time. Yeah. It's like, hey, come snowmobiling with us in Wyoming, and hey, this weekend let's do this. And I'm like, no, I have fun. And so I gave him some feedback on that recently. I'm like, he's like, hey, you want to go up with me? And I'm like, okay, there's probably about a 5% chance that I'll go. Right. And then he kind of clicks with him. And I think that's one of the biggest gulfs that are out there, right? Is introverts and extroverts trying to understand each other, right? Because he's probably like, oh, that Brian, he's just a stick in the mud. He doesn't like to have fun, and these type of things. And I don't view it that way at all, but and that's fine, right? That's fine.
Yeah. Knowing different people, right? Like we get value out of different things. We have different passions. And so it's so important as a leader, right, that you understand that of your group. Not everyone's going to want to do everything you want to do, leader, right? Like, how do you make sure that you know what other people are interested in, and that you can't cater to one person all the time, but how are you developing this environment that everyone feels like they belong and that they're a part of it and that they are responsible for pieces of this community that you're developing. That's what's big, making sure that people feel like that they belong, regardless of their differences, right? Which we all have.
Exactly. And understanding that. And if I say no, it's not personal, right? It's just that, sorry, that's not interesting to me. And that's kind of the interesting paradox of what we're talking about today. So number one, we're talking about growing and changing and improving and finding things and stuff like this. But part of this, and this is what's kind of the cool thing about getting older as well, is you get a much stronger sense of who you are as well. And it's kind of, you hear it kind of phrased on, like Twitter or things like this. It's like, okay, I don't give a crap anymore, right? There's certain things, don't give a crap about that. Okay, fine. Yeah, that's the way it is. And you have to pick and choose those different type of things and understand that.
Yeah, you do. It's really important to be mindful of that.
Yep, absolutely. And so on that feedback piece of it, finding those sources of that feedback, and then to Jill's point, executing against that and say, okay, is this something I want to work on? And then putting those things together and getting that feedback, super valuable. And the point I wanted to kind of emphasize on this as well is that you can improve your business abilities outside of business. Your friends, your college buddies from way back when can help you with those things as well, because they see the whole picture of who you are. And that can be applied to that side as well. It kind of gets back to what we're talking about, kind of this melding together of these two spheres. And so part of this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, you bring up a good point. We've all heard about, right? If you want to kind of see who you are, look at the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Yeah.
And so there's certainly value in that. I think even as we think about being at work, I mean, it applies to personal life as well. Like if I want to be someone who is creating a safer environment and psychological safety, or I want to be more, create belonging for my team members more. If I don't feel I have that today in my organization, should I be just looking within my organization then for support?
Mhm.
Probably not. So
Right.
where is it that you need to go? It's either bringing something in so everybody can elevate where they're at, or where do you find that community? Where do you find people that are going to support you in moving that forward? And that continued moving forward, because, right, I mean, we know our brains are wired to go back to comfort zone.
Mhm.
So we need a group to help us move in that direction, but then also stay in that direction.
Yeah.
That's the whole crux of culture. Culture is hard to change because everybody wants to shift back over here. So you have to be really intentional every day on how you are moving your mindset, your people, everything has to move together.
Yes.
No, that's a good point.
Mhm.
And this is an interesting point, and this is kind of contrary to the common wisdom out there as well. Is all right, identify your weak points and then build on those.
Mhm.
Well, what about maximizing your strengths instead, right?
Yeah.
So if you realize that you're weak in a particular area, build those skill sets and identify people on your teams who are strong in those areas. There's no person out there who's strong at everything. Doesn't
Right.
exist.
Yeah.
Right? So what are you really, really good at? I'm really good at organizing, and and so it's kind of funny. The company I work with, and Alexis is on here as well, is so one of the companies that I work with quite a bit. When I first started with them, they weren't sure whether my background was real or if it was, like a fake background like you have on Zoom or something like this. Until one day I reached around and grabbed something off my desk, and they're like, "Oh my, what?
That's
How'd you do
hilarious.
that? Witchcraft? What is this?" And I'm like, "Oh no, this is my," and they're like, "Really? What?" Yeah, so.
That's funny.
And if you can kind of extend this space that I work in here in my office to the rest of my house, does it look like this? Yeah, it does. Right? which sometimes drives my wife nuts, because if one little thing is slightly moved, I immediately see it. Right? I'm like, I can pretty much, if I'm gone for a period of time, business traveling or what have you, and come back, part of who she is nothing ever goes back exactly where it's supposed to go. Right? So the salt shaker is off by a quarter inch or whatever. And my brain, I see that immediately, and she just rolls her eyes, and
Right.
that's who I am. But understanding those things is super important. And does that matter? No, it's just who I am, and that's just who she is, right? So you got to have some fun with that too. But organization is one of my strengths.
Yeah.
But that's awareness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's elevating the awareness so that you both know Brian will want things exactly where they need to be. Cool. All right, now let's go forward.
Right. Exactly. And if you are working on a project and you need things to be where they need to be, right? You need someone to help manage that piece.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a strength.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so having that awareness, right? And knowing what your strengths are is so important. And I think that the shift has happened or is happening, where we do focus on our strengths and trying to work on strengthening those. And then just don't forget about your derailers. Those are really, when we think about like weaknesses, like some things you're not going to be interested in, right? Like you need to build your teams, but you also need to know, where are you going? Right? Where are you going? What type of leader do you need to be? And what is there that might derail you? Where it might not be a super duper strength, right? But if you don't know about HACCP, but you want to be a manager one day, you probably need to learn about HACCP, right? Like that could be a derailer for your career or where you want to go. And that's another reason why, we have conversations around succession planning and understanding where you want to be in 5 years, right? What skills are you going to need in your organization in 5 years? Because if you're not already developing your people to be able to manage that from a technical standpoint, as well as a leadership standpoint, eventually it's going to be a derailer for your culture, for your organization, that you don't have the necessary skills there. So just remember, okay, what are derailers? And then what am I super strong in? Or what do I want to grow as a strength? And then put your focus there.
Yeah. Well, and to keep the sports analogy going here, it's like a football team, right? So you have the big guys on the line, right? And they have their role. And then
Yeah.
you've got the quarterback, and he has his role associated with the team. You have all these different special players, and the coaches, they're managing those strengths and abilities. And what do they have on the side? They have backups, right? And they have the next generation of people that are coming up. And the job of the other team then is to figure out those areas of potential weakness. So if the quarterback is bad at scrambling, right? It's like, our game plan is going to be, we're going to rush that sucker all game. And understanding those things. It's a very rare occurrence, even in the NFL, that the top tier of these professional athletes who train their entire lives to be at the pinnacle of this ability, and even then, the truly balanced teams that are just amazing, even at that level, are very rare, right? The San Francisco 49ers with Joe Montana or something like this, right? Where you just had this amazing mix of people who came together at the right time. That's hard, right? And that all comes back to the coach and building that. And to your point, Tia, those teams take years to build.
Well, and I think with that, right, even when we'll continue the sports. If I'm a captain on the team, does that mean I'm ready to coach? Probably not. If I'm a coach, am I ready to just step into a general manager role? Probably not.
Yeah.
All of that is, otherwise we would see all the players coaching now. Well, clearly there's not enough space for that, but there's also not enough people developing to go into those roles. We have the same thing in our industry as well. People who are like rock star food safety managers and supervisors, they move into director roles and they're still being rock star managers and supervisors.
Right.
Oh, we need a different skill set.
Yeah.
And we even see that as we're coaching people who are going from directors to senior directors and even into VP roles. Those are different skill sets.
Yeah.
And if we're not thinking about that now and how I need to build those skills, and it's not just learn the language, learn to speak the language of management with money.
Right.
It's not just that.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why this development now is so critical to think about. Brian, you're just laughing away. What's happening over there?
I had a funny vision pop into my head of, so the football team, right? Let's say the quarterback's doing a crappy job, right? And the coach is mad. And he goes, come out of the game. I'm going in for you.
Oh, right.
No, that would never, ever happen, right? It would be even worse. That's not the coach's role.
Yeah.
They send in the backup quarterback. Same type of thing.
Yeah.
It is. That's a great analogy, because often that's what we think we need to do, right? You're not doing your job well. Let me come in and do it for you. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Right? That's the other day I was a little perplexed when I saw a headline in Wall Street Journal that said, I'm paraphrasing, but a CEO said, for our success in 2024, we just need our employees to work harder. And I was like,
ooh,
boom, wow.
Ooh.
How many people are not working hard? Raise your hand, right? No hands up. But what happens is, right, we'll go work harder. So what we do is we jump in and try to be the hands there, trying to work more.
Yeah. Or micromanage.
Right.
Yeah. But that's because we developed people enough? Have we developed enough bench strength? Have we developed the right skills? Right?
Yeah.
Competencies are changing. Roles are changing.
Yeah.
That's the work that needs to be done for us to be able to. I'm going to hope the CEO meant to work harder was better planning and being proactive in these areas.
Yeah. Right. Well, and I think that's a great segue into the next part of our conversation here, because the CEO doesn't realize it, but he needs to look in the mirror and figure out, we see this abbreviation on Twitter, right? AITA. Am I the a-hole? Right? Yeah, CEO, you are.
No, right.
But who's going to tell him that? Nobody, right? Are you going to risk your career to go in there and say, hey, boss, what you just did to the entire company, really, really bad?
Yeah. And even if you meant it differently, the words that came out were this.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's how people are interpreting that.
Right. You hope that they have a group around them that will be able to give that feedback. But that's why it's so important. And I think about it in the example of, I'm a director in an organization, or I'm the head of the function, and I'm just going to give my 2 cents. Well, your 2 cents is worth more than 2 cents. Like you, because of the position that you're in. So even as leaders, like we have to remember that. We have to remember that the words that we say have an impact. And we might not get that feedback back to us because we're CEO and people feel like that they can't give that feedback to CEO. So you have to look at yourself and say, okay, how am I developing myself so that I am more aware, that I'm able to freely seek feedback myself, and that I have this process in place that, okay, if I say something, it's going to eventually get to me because we have this process where our managers are checking in with their team, right? The directors are checking in with their managers, right? That whole feedback of up and down the organization, that's happening because you have set that up in place. Many times, right, there's really no good way to give the CEO feedback if I'm a supervisor. There's no good way of doing that.
No.
But if you have the right type of feedback loop in your organization, there is a way of doing that where I personally, as a supervisor, don't have to risk my job or feel uncomfortable or any of those things to be able to give feedback on what a CEO said or a strategy we rolled out or any of those things.
Right. And that's one of the things that is very important as a leader to recognize is that your team is watching you all the time. And if you come in a bad mood, they know immediately that you're in a bad mood and they're going to avoid you or what have you, because, Brian's on the warpath and stay out of his way.
Yes.
And you may not even know that's going on. And if it happens, right. And that's why that feedback is so important. So here's a story for me, which was a super valuable self-reflection. Am I the a-hole type lesson? And in this situation, I was. And it was a really good learning point for me. I had a member on my team, and we were going through and doing Six Sigma Black Belt projects. And he had picked a project, and it was a super ambitious project. And he tended to procrastinate on things. This super, super nice guy. And partway through his project, he said, "Brian, I want to change my project." And I'm like, "That's a really bad idea. You don't have a whole lot of time left here." No, I'll get it done. I promise. And I'm like, okay. And I knew he wasn't going to get it done. And I'm like, all right, I'm just going to wait for him to fail, right?
Yeah.
Bad move on my part. And sure enough, he came back to me at some point and said, Brian, I'm not going to get this done on time. I need some more extensions. And I got mad. It's one of the few times in my career I got mad at someone. And I yelled at him. And I'm like, no, you are not, right? And he left my office. And I was waiting for that moment because I knew he was going to do that. And man, did I screw that up. And I found out later after the fact, he went back to his desk and he was like shaking. He was so upset with the way I had treated him. And that was terrible what I did. And a few years later after the fact, so he's at a different company now and we had crossed paths and stuff like that. And I apologized to him for that. And I said, man, I really did you wrong. And it has bothered me ever since. And I want to let you know how bad I feel about that. And he forgave me for that. But sometimes the lessons that we learn don't have to be positive, right? And that one for me was a huge one. And it's something that I've carried with me from that point forward.
Yeah. And probably changed the way that you are as a leader.
Oh, absolutely. And I think part of it comes back to earlier in my career, I worked for a food company which had a very controversial, adversarial, yelling by management style.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to undo that, and perhaps that bubbled back up to the surface at that point in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and in our systems in general, right? We're more rewarded for being right than doing right. Often.
Yeah.
And that's part of what can contribute to that type of thing, because you're like, no, right? I need to be right about it. And this is what our system does. Like you said, that's kind of how the leadership style had been. And that's why this development is so important, because even in situations where you're like, well, it was all them. Hey, I always tell my kids, it takes two to tango.
Mm-hmm.
So you think it wasn't you, that somehow you have contributed. You just don't have enough awareness to understand what that is right now.
Right. Yeah.
And did you see the recent Costco thing with one of their facilities voted to unionize?
No.
Sent out a letter and said, and I'm paraphrasing, so somebody else knows more about this, jump in, but this is what I saw the other day on social, so I know I should have fact checked, but essentially what it said is Costco sent a letter out and said, we're sorry we failed you. Right? Like somewhere along the line, we didn't take care of you well enough, and this is where we're at, and we need to make this right.
Yeah.
That is awareness.
Yeah.
That is holding yourself accountable. That is being the one to go, even though I think it's not me, it's all them. Like I still played a role in this.
Yes.
It's kind of like when you watch, and it's always funny, like on YouTube or things like this, you click on one video and then you see a million of the same type. You'll see these videos of like, cops and their dash cams or their, and they'll pull somebody over and you can just see the train wreck coming, right? Because the person is not cooperating with the officer and they're being snarky and I'm not getting out of my car or whatever else. And you're just like, no, we know where this is going, right? And what always amazes me on these videos, like I think I kind of like watch them just from the psychology element, because a lot of times this person being arrested, they'll put them in cuffs or things like this. I watched one yesterday where this lady was like crazy and she was driving away from the police and running into cars, and they finally boxed her in and they pulled her out of the car. And she said, what did I do? What did I do? And I'm like, what? How can you be that unaware of your actions? Right? And the cops are just like, I could probably never be the patience police officers have in those situations. I'm just like, oh my goodness. But that for me was a really good example of just a complete and total lack of self-awareness. Now, it may have just been an act. I don't know, right? Trying to play innocent so they can get out of it. I don't know. But it was just like, really? You don't think you did anything, really?
But, as leaders, right, like we have team members, right, that do things and we're like, how could you possibly not see that car that you hit, right? But they did. Right? Like they haven't had the experience you had. They haven't, they didn't know that this thing was wrong. Right? Like they missed it. They missed the turn back there. They didn't know that turn was there. So I think like even as a leader, right? Like I can remember I read something, it was way before the holidays. So I have since slept since then. But one of the things they talked about as a leader is that you always have to be the better person. And so, and that stood out to me because, there's times where it's like, okay, lady, you hit 3 cars, right? Like you hit 3 cars and like, I'm going to have this conversation with you as if you knew that was wrong. But as a leader, you're always the better person. That means you're never petty, right? Which is hard for some, right? Like you're never snarky with a person. That's hard, right? You're never, oh, you should have known better, or you should have had all this information. You're none of those things. You're always the bigger person. So you're always the person to say, okay, let's walk through it. Let's understand how we do this differently next time. Let's understand the consequences of today. Let's end like walking through those things, even though in your head, you're like, oh my gosh, this person should know this. This is the 3rd conversation. How are you going to be the bigger person in that situation? Because great leaders, they're always the bigger person. And I think that's a struggle. That's something that you have to intentionally do every single time you're having an interaction with your team.
Well, that's a really good point, Tia. And I think it kind of segues into our next part of the conversation, which is, so this is a two-way street. So if we're out there asking for and soliciting feedback and help with us growing, we need to be looking for opportunities to help people as well too, and providing them with feedback. And so what are some of your ideas, right? Because just going up to somebody randomly and saying, hi, I want to give you feedback, right? That's not a good idea. What are some ways that you guys can think of that you can use these type of skills to help others improve as well without stepping on their toes?
Right. Well, I think the big thing is that you have to create that safe space, and people have to feel comfortable talking with you. And you have to build that trust with people. Like just starting there and building that foundation, those relationships built on trust and psychological safety. Then you can step up and say, hey, let's talk about your presentation as you go and have this presentation somewhere else, or whatever it happens to be. Let me even give you some great feedback, right? It doesn't even have to be constructive. Think about the times that someone was like, oh, you did such a great job. I love the way you talk about this. And you're like, thank you. I appreciate that feedback, but I really want to know what Jill has to say about it. Right? Like that's because they know more about Jill, or maybe Jill's presentation has been something that they want to model. So it's like you have to do those steps of first creating that relationship and making sure that person understands that as you are talking with them, you're there to help them.
Right. And that space where they know that vulnerability is not going to be used against them.
Right. Exactly.
One of the things that I love when we do in boot camp is we actually have an entire module where we're like, we're going to be intentional on feedback. Because I know often people say, if you're doing feedback, like do it in the moment and make it, like there's like all these criteria, right? Like that you're supposed to do. Well, that is definitely one way. So not to take away from that. But if it's a habit we're looking to build upon, being intentional. We have people actually sit and like write them out. Right? Like actually write them out. So that way, when you go to someone to give them some feedback, like they see you've put thought into it.
Yes.
You are very intentional on what you're sharing, and you're doing it from a place of kindness.
Yes.
And I think people often forget that feedback is about creating success for everyone. Right? Feedback doesn't come from like, well, hey, you're just, like the a-hole. Like, no, that's not helpful.
Right.
Like, let's give some actual like helpful feedback so that we can all have success.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think part of, and this is why we're here every Friday, is part of this is helping that next generation of people come up through the ranks, right? It's why I wrote the book, and these type of things is passing that knowledge on to the next generation, because we've been there and we understand some of the challenges they're going through, because as we know, people become supervisors and managers not because they went to manager school. It's they were available, the position was open, and all of a sudden their boss comes in and says, "Congratulations, you're now the manager," and you have a team of 6 people who used to be your coworkers, and they have no idea how to lead that team now. And to your point, Tia, right? That skill set of being a doer versus now being a leader, completely different, and they have no idea where to begin.
Right.
Recognizing those potential opportunities and helping that person succeed in that role, you've made an ally for life if you can help them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And consider 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age every day. 10,000. Think of how many people are in your organization or around you in circles, places that we see. Like, right, I can look in food safety and see lots of people that were foundational early in their career that are getting ready to retire. That are leading companies, leading their organizations. Gosh, this is where now we're at this, I think Tia and I often say, like this mission critical stage. Like all this fear of like knowledge walking out the door, of experience walking out the door. Guess what? That's why development now is so important. And it's not just this, once again, not just this year. It's 3 years, 5 years.
Yes.
And I think that's why even as we talk about how do you develop yourself as a leader for awareness and these human skills, no matter what role you're moving into, those are going to be foundational pieces. It's tack on the other things as you go. But if you have a plan for how am I developing that, you're right, it's going to carve the path much easier.
Right. And building on that, I think, and we've talked about this on the chat before, is that people don't necessarily realize, especially in technical fields, just how important those skills are on the people side of things. You aren't promoted just because you're good at doing reports. You're being promoted because you're good at managing teams of people and you're good to work with. And those conversations behind the scenes, I was on the other side of those conversations. So as department leaders and part of the senior leadership team and things like this, and we talk about, to your point, Tia, the succession planning and those people who are ready to move up to that next level. Those conversations focus more on the people skill side than they do the technical side. 100% of the time.
Yeah, they do, because that's, your team is there to be that technical strength, right? You really need someone that can interact and support and remove barriers, all those things that we need leaders to do. We run into problems when a person gets promoted and they're in the manager role or, whatever the title happens to be. And now they're managing people and they don't have those people skills, right? They're still trying to execute versus stepping away and thinking, how do I remove barriers? Or even how do I allow my team to go and grow themselves? That's a piece of that. And you're right, we don't get those skills going through school, and many times we don't get those skills early on in our career. It's the reason why we created Catalyst.
Yeah.
Because we have to change that statement.
We do.
We need to get to the place that making sure that our teams have leadership skills before they enter a manager role, before we expect for them to be pros at managing people. We give them those skills along the way. We help them develop those skills throughout their career so that they're always ready, right? Through that practice, reflection time, that they're ready for the next step when it comes. And so, that is our mission at Catalyst, is to transform the way people lead in food. And a piece of that is making sure that we are helping people develop along the way.
Absolutely. Right. It goes back to our football analogy, right? So if I'm a new football coach, I need to learn from other coaches, not from players. Now I need to learn how to be a coach.
Yeah.
And we don't need you to one of your examples earlier, like we don't need the coach to step in and try to be the quarterback he used to be, right? Yeah. And if he does that, who's coaching? Who's coaching? We need someone to coach. That's why you're in this position. We need someone to be the quarterback. We need someone, right, to be the receivers on the team. And we need them to be good at their job, and we need to provide them with the right tools. Because if I come in, it's not going to be the best, right? And no one's doing my job, which is probably handing out water if it was my job, but because I'm not coaching. But no one's doing the job of the manager if the manager is doing the job of the supervisor.
Yep. It's that old get out of the way, I'll do it. You're taking too long.
Or the organization not providing the right resources. Right. Yeah. Where the team is not staffed. Let's just split your role and do. Again, if you're doing jobs outside of what you need to be doing, that means no one's doing what you're supposed to be doing. No one's having the strategy. No one's having those conversations around top leadership, strategy and how it relates to what you do. No one's having the conversations with people to figure out, what do you think about what the CEO said, right? No one's having those type of conversations because we're all trying to do someone else's job.
Right. Yeah. And, really it's the difference between chess and checkers, right? Leaders need to be thinking of chess, right? When we watch chess games, I don't play chess, but people are really deep in thought about what moves are going on and what moves can the other people be making. It's really thinking through those scenarios and it's business scenarios, it's people scenarios. That's the level of thinking that's needed when you move to a director and VP. If you want to play checkers are good. We do that a lot as managers. We got through the day, products out the door. Yeah. Everyone went home with all their digits, right? Those are the things that are really exciting. But the skill set needed for each of those games changes as you move into those. They're both fun. They both are important. They both bring joy to people's lives. It's just figuring out where you want to be. So if you're playing, chess, but you're applying checker thought process, it's not going to work.
It'll work, yeah. Right. That's how I feel when, I've been playing checkers and then someone's like, okay, you're up for chess. And then you're just if you try to use the same tools, the same mind, you're not going to win.
No.
You're eaten alive.
You're going to get your butt kicked very quickly. And it's a good point because it's kind of the concrete versus the abstract. So when you're accomplishing really visible, clear objectives in a production facility, let's get the product out for today. Yes, right. Those are easy to see the wins. But the farther you go up in the organization, the more abstract your activities become. And that's why, having those feedback mechanisms and being able to honestly have conversations around those is so important. So if you're the CEO, kind of going back to the coach analogy, ideally you need other CEOs that you can talk with. And this is something people don't know. CEOs talk to each other.
Yeah.
And hopefully that CEO who made that big screw up that we were talking about earlier, we just need to work harder next year. One of his CEO buddies called him up and said, dude, what are you doing? That was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. right? And being able to explain that honestly and doing that. And I put honesty as a virtue in our notes for a reason today, because that's one of the hardest things to accomplish, because a lot of times people think honesty is just being an a-hole again, right? So I'm just telling it like it is. And if they can't deal with it, that's too bad. No, that's not being honest. That's just being an a-hole. Right?
Right.
So being able to diplomatically and honestly share, and frankly, if you're able to develop that skill set around the virtue of honesty and using that and applying that in your life and in those around you, people know that, right? And are that's a leadership skill for sure.
Yeah. I think a part of giving feedback, being honest with someone, communication in general, is that the other person has to take in that information. Otherwise, you're just talking, right? You're not communicating. And so a piece of that is being able to communicate in a way that the other person can receive it. And I think when we talk about, honesty, and people are like, well, I'm going to tell it the way it is. Well, if no one's picking it up, right, then you're really just talking. You're not having a conversation. So how can you communicate differently so that the people you're communicating to, right, will be able to take in that information? It's like the love languages, right? Like they tell people to communicate in the love language the other person, right, takes in. Because if you're communicating in a different language, like, then you might as well not even be talking to them, because they're not taking it in, because that's not the way they take in information. And that's important for leaders to think about. When you're communicating a strategy or a pathway forward, like what that looks like depends on how your people take in information. It's the reason why organizations communicate their mission and vision many different times in many different ways in many different settings, because they have many different people that take in information differently.
Good point. Good point. So one of the things we promised here at the beginning of our conversation, we're getting toward the end here, is kind of giving some ideas to people around potential areas that you can look at for yourself, right? And honestly look at for activities you can use in this coming year. So I wrote down a few here. So of course, number one on everybody's list is always exercise and health, right? I'm going to do a better job this year on exercising and managing my health and doing these type of things. Scott Adams with the Dilbert cartoon, he has a really good book on setting these type of things. And one of the things that he talks about around these type of things is it's better to have systems than goals. It's like, what? And what he's talking about there, it's better to have a system in place for healthy eating versus simply saying, I'm going to lose 20 pounds, right? Because if you have a good methodology in place for eating, those things are going to follow automatically. And then that becomes more of a lifelong habit versus trying to lose that 20 pounds and then you go back to your old habits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to add mental health in there as well.
Yeah. So some other ones that I think are super important is, and this applies pretty much everyone. I think this is what always in the top 3 for people's greatest fears. I think it's, beats out death is public speaking. Right?
Yeah.
Well, if you want to develop your career and you want to succeed in what we're talking about here today, you have to be able to talk in front of people, period.
Yeah. You're going to have conversations in front of people. That's for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And figuring out your style of how you do that.
Yeah. 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 That's a good one.
Another good one I wrote down here on the list too is learning how to influence and negotiation skills, right?
Yeah.
So as a mom, Jill, I'm sure, you've developed some finely tuned negotiation skills.
I have, but it's so funny. One of the workshops, one of the modules we have that people love the most is all about influence.
Oh yeah.
Like where we dig into like what we normally use and some of the data behind it. Like that is like, ooh, that blew my mind for awareness. So my negotiating and influence at home looks very different after all of that.
Your boys are probably like, ooh, I really want to do this now. What kind of influencing skills has my mom picked up on?
No, they don't. They're not that keen on it.
Another good one I had here list is reading and growing. So when you're reading, what do you choose to read? Do you read murder mysteries, or are you reading books that can give you insights into new information, like Scott Adams, like I was just talking about, right? new inflections from other successful people that you could potentially incorporate into what you're doing. So how do you choose, and what you choose to read is very important.
Yeah, it is. It doesn't mean that you can't read some good fiction.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, of course. Got to balance. Looking at other type of activities around, let's say, meditation or journaling or things of this that allow you to reflect back on different activities. People think, meditation, all this woo-woo stuff, right? No, it can be as simple as, okay, just doing some, deep breathing, right? And resetting yourself when you're going to have an important conversation and being aware of that.
Yeah. Those kind of in my mind kind of loop under like self-coaching.
Yeah.
There's a lot that you can do for self-coaching to move and learn about yourself.
Right.
Yep. Your core beliefs, taking a look at those every now and then and saying, do these still apply?
I like that one because people think that their beliefs are going to stay the same throughout their whole life.
No.
And for the people that lived, right, you're probably doing this because it doesn't. So checking in with yourself, like, what are my beliefs? What are my values today?
Yeah, exactly. And like Duncan's thing is here. Greetings, Duncan. Your state is a lagging indicator of your habits and behaviors. Absolutely. If you smoke, right? Yeah, you're not going to see the damage right away, but go back and see that person in 30 years.
Yeah,
you'll see the damage that did, and that state is what caused that. So part of this then too, right, is a big chunk of this is making yourself accountable. If you have a goal for changing your diet or things of these nature, tell people.
Yeah,
it's a lot harder to back out of that stuff if people are aware of that. Hey,
True.
Brian, how's that low carb diet coming along? I had some cake yesterday, right? That's huge. Right? Having that public accountability is very, very important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, guys, we're out of time already. Boy, the time flew. And any closing thoughts, Jill or Tia?
Gosh, that's a great question. Well, you know what? Okay, as people are thinking about development for next year, next Wednesday we have a vision board workshop. So because one of the things is we're tapping into these different channels that help us as we're developing. Because if we write it down and tell people, that's awesome. But we're going to tap into like the power of this connection of mind and action and like the feelings that go along with it. So, join us next week. It'll be awesome. And it's all going to be around development for the year, but inspiration, like tapping into your own through the year.
Yeah. Absolutely.
No, good point. And to close out here on Duncan always has great comments. So most of our strongly held beliefs are entirely baseless and happen by chance. Absolutely.
It's true.
So a big chunk of figuring this out for yourself is the recognition that a lot of the beliefs that you have were installed by others, your parents, your church, whatever, and you just accept these at face value. This is always a good time of year to take a look at those things.
Absolutely. Once again, that's right. We have an entire module on beliefs and values in level 2 of our program, because that's when people are ready to be like, I didn't even realize I'm still hanging on to that thing back here. Like we talked about, that came from my family. I don't even know why. So
exactly. We brought up boot camp a few times, but we do have a new spring cohort starting in February 6th.
Yeah.
So, to be intentional about your leadership, if you've been thinking about, I need to be intentional about the way that I lead, and be a better leader, or there's a promotion that's coming, or man, I haven't developed myself in a while, and there's different people around me, and I need to learn how to connect with those. Like, come talk to us. Sign up for our boot camp. Starts February 6th. We're excited about it, and that's something else that we have going on.
Excellent. Yep. So we've got the emails here. So reach out to Jill and Tia at their emails, or you go to foodsafetycatalyst.com. So with that, we'll close out the chat here for this week. Thank you, Jill and Tia. Fantastic conversation. Hopefully we've given people some things to think about. And remember here too, right? You don't need to tackle everything all at once. Pick one or two things out of this and say, okay, I'm going to work on this, and then move on to the next thing, right? Don't make it overwhelming. Grow those skill sets over time is super important. Speaking of which, so for the next weeks, no chat for the next 2 weeks, believe it or not. So I think this is the first break from the chat I've had in 3 years. So I'm going to be doing some intentional reflection during that time as well. So we'll see everybody back then on the next chat, which will be, as I pull up my calendar quickly. So we will be back here for the chat on the 26th of January. We'll have amazing guests like Jill and Tia back on the show. In the meantime, everybody, enjoy your weekend. Thank you for joining us this week. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you back here in a little over 2 weeks for the next chat. So have a great time. Thank you, Jill and Tia. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you then. So have a good one, everybody.